It isn't hard to notice design trends in the video game industry these days. I'm betting any one of you watching this video could give me an example or two in 10 seconds or less. It's fairly common for developers to borrow ideas from other games and work them into their own. Be it a feature from another game that was well received is adapted into more current games, or that a game is an almost wholesale clone of an already successful one. There's a lot of playing it safe with concepts and systems that are known to do well. This isn't an uncommon practice nowadays, nor is it a new one. Look at the Atari 2600, which had a ton of games that use the same basic concepts and gameplay, far too many for me to delve into in this video. Instead, I'm going to give snapshot examples of various games throughout the following years that influenced how future games are developed and how gaming development has changed. Following the US video game market crash of 1983, which was caused in part by a flood of lackluster games that were little more than reskins of each other, the console scene finally recovered with the release of the Nintendo Entertainment System. Nintendo's foothold in the United States gaming industry was sealed by the popularity of a game that would go on to become one of the most iconic and recognizable across the entirety of gaming culture. Super Mario Bros. Quickly became a must-have title for the console, and for good reason. The controls and level design were top-notch, and showed the world that gaming didn't have to be about low-quality shovelware being pumped out as fast as it could be. Gaming was not just a fad. The success of this new platforming game didn't go unnoticed, however. Sega had also made an attempt to break into the newly reviving gaming industry, but the Sega Master System was overshadowed by the NES, largely due to exclusivity deals that Nintendo had signed with third-party developers. Sega wasn't ready to give up, however. They had seen how Mario had become Nintendo's de facto mascot, and knew that they needed something, and someone, to compete with him to make their second console, the Mega Drive, successful. This marks the birth of Sonic the Hedgehog. With the release of Sonic the Hedgehog on Sega Mega Drive, Sega Genesis in the US, they finally had a mascot to compete with Mario. Not only was Sonic cool, but his game took the familiar platforming genre popularized by Mario and put a different spin on it. Sonic the Hedgehog took a fast-paced approach that, while capitalizing on the popularity of platformer games, made it distinct from the crowd. Sonic the Hedgehog, along with an aggressive marketing campaign of "Genesis does what Nintendo don't," put Sega into a position where they were able to compete with the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, and carve themselves a part of the market share that Nintendo had been dominating for years. Well, for a while. Skipping ahead to 1997, another notable game that borrowed elements from another is Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Konami's previous games in the Castlevania series were more traditional action platform games, but all of that changed when they developed Symphony. Taking inspiration from games such as the Legend of Zelda series and Super Metroid, they went in a new direction with their newest release. Non-linear, exploration-focused gameplay replacing the previous game's flow of one level going into another. This was an incredible leap forward for the franchise. Instead of being a relatively short experience with little replayability, players were now faced with a massive castle to explore and plunder, as well as multiple endings to experience. Since the release of Symphony of the Night, Castlevania has stayed true to this new, widely applauded style of world within the games. Exploring the environments, finding upgrades that unlock new areas, and looking for secrets became ingrained into the franchise, to the point where Metroidvania became a fairly common descriptor of other games that followed this trend, such as Axiom Verge and Cave Story. As a matter of fact, the only Castlevania games since to deviate from this are the reboot Lords of Shadow and Lords of Shadow Mirror of Fate. Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2 returned to the open world design that Castlevania had previously used for a decade. However, with the new style of gameplay in Lords of Shadow, the non-linear environment didn't mesh very well and was one of the biggest changes between the two that the player base didn't like. Overall though, the new Metroidvania style of gameplay was considered a huge improvement for the series. It is such a well-designed concept that is utilized quite often in games today. Another development trend that was set in motion during this console generation is that of Collectathon games, such as Super Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, Crash Bandicoot, and Spyro the Dragon. This generation of gaming was still heavily influenced by the platformers of yesteryear, and one of the best ways that developers found to increase investment in continuing to play their games was to add secondary goals like collectible items, things to hunt down and find within the levels of the game that were often well hidden or required skilled play to reach. These games were so well done and so enjoyable to play that several of them became the most popular games of their respective platforms, with Banjo-Kazooie arguably being the most popular of them all. These games weren't a short-lived phenomenon either. While they might not have stayed as prevalent as the next generation of gaming consoles went on, quite a few were still made and many continue to be cherished to this day. Jak and Daxter, Ratchet & Clank, Super Mario Sunshine, and even games that didn't involve traditional platforming such as Metroid Prime had aspects of collectathons, giving players things to search for and reasons to explore the game worlds that the developers had so expertly crafted. And even though games with a focus on collection aren't as common nowadays, many still carry forth the ideas that came about during the 90s. The worlds of the Assassin's Creed and Tomb Raider series have items scattered across them for players to find as they scale the environment. The recent games in the Mario franchise, such as Super Mario 3D World and Yoshi's Woolly World, both have collectibles to search out as you delve into their excellently designed levels. And Banjo-Kazooie is even getting a spiritual successor in the form of Yooka-Laylee, a game in the works by several of the developers of Banjo-Kazooie. While collectathons as a focus aren't as popular nowadays as they used to be, there's still plenty of influence to be found in modern game design. In more recent years, the genre of roguelikes has become popular, particularly amongst the indie developer scene. And to get ahead of people who like to nitpick, I know that there are multiple labels that people apply to this type of game, such as roguelite, but I'm going to stick with roguelike for simplicity's sake. Roguelikes are a genre that, as the name implies, borrow elements from a game named Rogue, which was a popular Unix game during the 1980s. Rogue is known for several different design elements, such as procedurally generated dungeon layout, as well as character permadeath, which means that once your character was dead, you had to start the game over from scratch, though I think that was mostly a symptom of game design at the time. The popularity of Rogue directly inspired several games in the following years, such as Hack, NetHack, Angband, and more. As time went on, the presence of roguelikes died down a fair amount, with some games achieving moderate success under the moniker Mystery Dungeon, such as the Chocobo's Dungeon series based off the Final Fantasy series and Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. Roguelikes wouldn't see a big resurgence until the late 2000s, when they exploded in popularity due to games such as Spelunky, The Binding of Isaac, FTL Faster Than Light, and Rogue Legacy. The part of this that I find the most fascinating is how these games implement the ideas of roguelikes in different ways, making each completely different games while still maintaining a similar feel to them. Spelunky and The Binding of Isaac in particular are fairly close to the traditional roguelike style, with permadeath, items to learn, progression of floors with no backtracking, and brutal difficulty that can end a run within seconds. FTL Faster Than Light switched things up a bit by keeping the brutal difficulty and random generation, while being based around strategic starship combat that puts you in the captain's seat. And let's not forget one of my personal favorites, Crypta the Necrodancer. Necrodancer surprisingly stays true to the original concepts and gameplay of Rogue, while adding a rhythm game motif over the top that works astonishingly well. Dungeon crawling and fighting deadly monsters while simultaneously having to play along to the beat and find the path to the next floor before the current song is over, winds up being extremely fun and good at keeping you on your toes. As with most roguelikes, getting to the bottom floor and beating the game relies heavily on learning how most enemies behave, as well as unlocking increasingly more powerful items to come across in subsequent attempts. The huge amount of replayability found in these more recent indie developer roguelikes is one of the biggest draws for consumers to buy them. Not only are indie games typically priced lower than most AAA game releases, but the amount of replayability allows many people to play these games for tens, if not hundreds of hours. Speaking of games that people have spent, and continue to spend, hundreds of hours playing, here's a topic that some of you have probably seen coming. Voxel-based building survival games, the most notable and recognizable of which would have to be Minecraft. Minecraft is not the first game focused around a world built of cubes that could be reshaped as the player pleased, but it certainly exploded in popularity, and over the last several years has become a cultural phenomenon. Minecraft's creator, Marcus Notch Persson, was directly inspired to start working on Minecraft by a game called Infiniminer, which was, as far as I'm aware at least, the birth of the block world genre. Minecraft's scope started pretty small, with a limited amount of different types of blocks, animals, and gameplay functionality, but was vastly fleshed out by the time it actually released. During this development period, anyone who was interested in the game was able to purchase access to it and enjoy it in its current feature-incomplete state for half the price that it would eventually release at. This marks Minecraft as one of the earliest successful adopters of an early access type model of business, something that has gone on to be a large part of the gaming industry today, for better or worse. As time went on, Minecraft continued to add more content to the game and eventually see releases on many different platforms, including mobile and several home gaming consoles. Minecraft's success has been extremely inspirational to many would-be game developers, and it's not hard to see why. Going from a side project while Persson was working a full-time job to being purchased by Microsoft in 2014 for $2.5 billion is nothing short of amazing. Many titles have been released in the years following Minecraft that fit the block world genre, achieving varying levels of success. Some take the block world formula and create a unique and engaging experience, while others are pretty basic and appear to be mostly an attempt to cash in on the popularity of Minecraft, especially prior to the release of Minecraft on other platforms. In the end, though, it is hard to deny the cultural impact that Minecraft has had on the world at large. Alright, I apologize ahead of time for this next one. It's a bit of a cop-out on my part, but it feels like the fairest way to present it. Crafting and upgrade systems. These have been in games for a long time, and pinpointing a single progenitor of them is not really the best way to present it, because they all contributed to their current state in some form or other, I'm sure. Crafting systems have been in gaming for decades, being especially prevalent in MMOs due to the way they help support an active economy for the players. While some are more complicated than others, most involve the basic concepts of have X number of item Y and turn them into item Z, this often being the simplest way of implementation, as well as being easy for players to understand how it works. Upgrade systems within video games are often a branch of crafting, sometimes involving your character to be knowledgeable in a certain trade skill, and usually involving some sort of material being needed to upgrade the item in question. They also can be a direct upgrade to your character's skills, allowing you to do something new or enter a new area, though this is more common with action games than with role-playing games. Ways of crafting new items and upgrading things are a popular way for game developers to add smaller milestones for players to feel a sense of progress, so that they can enjoy their time with the game between those larger accomplishments and feel like they're working towards something. Many games released nowadays have these systems implemented, such as Tomb Raider and the Assassin's Creed games, Minecraft, and even the upcoming The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is going to feature some amount of crafting. And speaking of Assassin's Creed, free running. Free running, or gameplay mechanics similar to free running and parkour, have become fairly common in action and platforming games of recent years, popularized by the Assassin's Creed series. For those of you who don't know, free running in video games is a way of navigating your environment that revolves around using objects around you to get from point A to point B as efficiently and quickly as possible. This method of traversing your surroundings has been an integral part of the gameplay of Assassin's Creed, allowing you to quickly make your way through complex environments to make your way to your destination, close your distance with someone, or escape capture from guards. Mirror's Edge is another game that features this style of movement, though in this case it is the focus of the game instead of just a tool at your disposal. Traveling from rooftop to rooftop and through buildings, your goal is to make it from one point to another while being as efficient as possible to conserve momentum. Objects that you can use while running turn a bright red as you approach, to help the player recognize aspects of their environment that they can take advantage of quickly and clearly, without complicating the game's display with unnecessary clutter. Free running is something that has only entered gaming design in the past decade or so, but is definitely becoming more prevalent. While it is most prominent within the Assassin's Creed franchise, elements of the design philosophies of free running have been cropping up in other recent games, such as how Lara moves about the world in the more recent Tomb Raider games, focusing on fluidity and using her surroundings to her advantage, which adds to the immersion of the game and helps the world feel more natural, as opposed to adding more traditional means of maneuvering about the game world, like ladders and platforms. I hate to have brought up Tomb Raider and Assassin's Creed again, but they really do seem to be an amalgamation of several design trends from the past couple of decades. And even with all these different topics we've covered, these are just some of the main design trends that you can see as gaming has developed as an entertainment medium. There are many smaller things that have become popularized by specific games that aren't quite as well spread, and rather than devote entire sections of these topics, I thought it might be fun to just give a brief overview of several of them. Some of these are more well known than others, so I'd be interested to read down in the comments below which of these you did and did not know. Ready? Alright, did you know that, following the release and popularity of Doom, several first-person shooter games were referred to as Doom clones? It was several years before the term first-person shooter became popular. Many games that release today that involve collecting or battling monsters are called Pokemon clones, but Pokemon was not the first series to do that. For example, the Digimon and Megami Tensei franchises existed before Pokemon and followed similar concepts. Blizzard Entertainment's most well-known franchise, Warcraft, was briefly in talks of being part of Games Workshop's Warhammer franchise, but this deal fell through for multiple reasons. Despite this, there are some design inspirations in both Warcraft and StarCraft that came from Warhammer and Warhammer 40k, respectively, while the gameplay was inspired by Dune 2, which is often considered the defining game in how real-time strategy games have developed. Though it has fallen out of favorability in more recent years, the SimCity franchise was wildly popular during the 90s and early 2000s, spawning many other Sim-titled games. Some more well-known, like Sim Earth, Sim Farm, and Sim Tower, while others are a bit more obscure, such as Sim Health, Sim Tunes, and even a Sim Refinery business aid that was developed for Chevron. The popularity of simulation games continues today, with games like Euro Truck Simulator, Train Simulator, and ones that follow closer in SimCity's footsteps, like Cities Skylines. Despite being among the first arcade games to exist, and being the first to achieve widespread popularity, Pong itself was not the first electronic table tennis game. Alan Alcorn, the developer of Pong, has stated that the project was assigned to him by Nolan Bushnell after Bushnell played the Magnavox Odyssey's table tennis game, though Bushnell himself claimed otherwise. Now, after talking about all these different topics, I am in no way saying that this is a bad thing. On the contrary, many great game design elements that make games as enjoyable to play as they are today have only been improved upon by years of iteration and people approaching the same trends in their own way. If something works, there's absolutely no reason to not take inspiration from it. As the saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They are trends for a reason. Many people find these types of gameplay to be highly engaging and a lot of fun to experience, and they help the consumer know what they're getting into before they even purchase the game. This is also why games that are more experimental or try things differently don't tend to do as well as the more mainstream ones. People aren't as willing to take a chance on something they may or may not end up enjoying when there's a game that they know they will get enjoyment out of, that will be worth their hard-earned money. Given that element of the equation, you can see at least part of why there are certain trends in gaming that tend to be really common amongst the higher budget ventures. And gaming isn't the only entertainment medium that does this either. Not many people notice the connections and inspirations, but if you take a moment to pay attention and critically examine things, it's pretty easy to notice all the design trends that have come about in the past few decades of gaming history.